Hey guys, tonight we trudge into one of history's most infamous battlefields, the muddy, smoke-choked expanse of Waterloo, and you probably won't survive this. At least not without tripping over a cannonball or two in your imagination. You feel the chill in the early evening air, the weight of your boots sinking into wet Belgian soil, and the distant rumble of drums vibrating through the ground, almost like the heartbeat of history itself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I like knowing who's awake for these slightly terrifying bedtime adventures. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking across the battlefield in your mind, feeling the uneven ground shift beneath you. Around you, the air smells faintly of wet earth and gunpowder, a sensory reminder that two armies once collided here in a clash that would decide Europe's fate. Historians still argue whether Napoleon underestimated the resilience of the Allied forces under Wellington or whether the weather alone slowed his grand plan, but you don't have to choose sides tonight. You're just here, tiptoeing through the echoes of history. A stray breeze rustles the tall grasses, and you imagine musket smoke curling lazily, almost like fog, over the trenches and formations, hiding soldiers from each other as if the battlefield itself were holding its breath. In the distance, a horse whinnies, or perhaps it's just your imagination, but you can almost feel the pulse of charging cavalry, the adrenaline, the panic. You catch yourself wondering if anyone back then had the foresight to think, maybe we should have stayed home. Probably not. Because if they had, none of this spectacular chaos would exist for you to mentally wander through tonight. You pass a shallow depression in the ground and notice little details. A splintered wagon, a lone boot, remnants of the logistical nightmare that was the Napoleonic war machine. It's oddly peaceful, in a tense sort of way, like standing in a museum diorama where the figures might start moving at any second. And yes, somewhere in your subconscious, a tiny voice whispers, "You could trip over a cannonball at any moment." You shake it off with a small grin, because part of the fun tonight is imagining yourself there, dodging history while learning it. As you trudge further, the layers of time peel back. Mud, blood, smoke, and strategy all blending into a surreal landscape. You notice a strange pattern in the grass, almost like footprints frozen in history, and it strikes you how human ambition, fear, and folly all leave subtle marks that persist long after the final trumpet sounds. And so, your journey has begun, with boots in the mud, senses alive, and a mind wide open for everything the cursed battlefield of Waterloo has to whisper tonight. You feel the weight of Europe pressing down on your shoulders as you step deeper into Napoleon's shadow. Imagine standing there in 1815, the air buzzing with tension as the man himself consolidates power, crafting strategies that will ripple across the continent. His rise wasn't sudden. Oh no, you've probably heard the legend of the young artillery officer with the famously short stature and the even bigger ego, but the political currents of Europe had been building for years, pushing nations toward inevitable collision. You sense the murmur of diplomats and monarchs in the background, their powdered wigs and clipped voices shaping decisions that will determine who survives, who surrenders, and who becomes a cautionary tale in history books. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's genius lay in his battlefield tactics alone or in his uncanny ability to manipulate the fragile alliances of European powers. Either way, standing here in the imagined corridors of power, you can practically feel the tension vibrating beneath the polished floors. As you wander through this mental reconstruction, you notice curious details, the eccentricities of his generals, the coded messages sent across Europe, the midnight councils that must have smelled faintly of candle wax and anxiety. You might find yourself smirking at how a man capable of commanding entire armies could get tripped up by weather reports and stubborn marshes. There's a fringe tidbit tucked in here somewhere. Napoleon reportedly carried a small, almost talismanic notebook where he scribbled reminders about everything from troop morale to which cheeses he liked for breakfast. It's bizarre, but it humanizes the myth, letting you picture him nervously adjusting his uniform, peering at maps, imagining the faces of his soldiers as the drumbeat of war echoes in the distance. You follow the timeline, imagining the alliances forming and fraying like delicate threads, each one a potential spark for conflict. The Austrians, the Prussians, the British, all calculating, plotting, and moving like chess pieces on a very, very high-stakes board. You can almost hear the whispered debates over wine glasses in shadowed rooms, the polite curses under breaths when a messenger arrives late, the subtle tension of nations balancing on a knife's edge. Quirky, almost comical decisions appear in your mind too, like the notion that one misread order could reroute entire brigades into a puddle of mud, yet somehow, even in chaos, strategy and chance dance together in a deadly ballet. You trudge along, the echo of those political maneuvers grounding you in context, reminding you that Waterloo isn't just a battlefield, it's the culmination of decades of ambition, pride, and human error. The air feels heavy as the storm of historical inevitability gathers, and you're carried along with it, imagining yourself not merely an observer but a traveler through the intricate web of power, ego, and war. And as you look at the imagined horizon of European capitals, you realize how every decision, every misstep, and every whispered negotiation has paved the way for the mud, cannons, and chaos that await you in Belgium. For tonight, though, you simply take it all in, letting the weight of history press gently against your mind, guiding your journey toward the battlefield itself, where theory becomes tangible and strategy meets the grit of reality. You trudge through the Belgian countryside, your boots sinking into the soft, rain-soaked mud, and suddenly you're acutely aware of the terrain that will host one of history's most infamous clashes. The landscape stretches out in gentle rolling hills, punctuated by shallow streams and stubborn hedgerows that will soon shape the flow of battle. You probably didn't expect to spend your bedtime wandering through mud, but here you are, tiptoeing alongside armies that will soon collide with thunderous intensity. Historians still argue whether Wellington's choice of the ridge near Mont Saint-Jean gave him a decisive advantage, but as you imagine the gentle slope and its commanding view, it's easy to see why he chose it. Each subtle rise and fall in the land dictates troop movement, influences cannon fire, and determines who will gain the upper hand or who will simply sink in the mud. You step carefully, imagining the weight of uniforms, muskets, and supplies pressing down on soldiers' shoulders. The roads are quagmires of mud, churned up by horses, wagons, and marching men, making you wonder how anyone could maintain formation. A quirky detail drifts into your mind. Some soldiers reportedly used cow dung as a makeshift sunscreen, practical, if a little revolting, and perhaps a reminder that in war, resourcefulness often trumps comfort. You can almost feel the vibrations underfoot as mounted scouts test the land, slipping slightly, hearing the groans of wagons stuck in the mire, and feeling the tension of commanders calculating whether to advance or hold. Every puddle, every clump of grass, becomes a strategic factor, and you can't help but chuckle at how mundane terrain will shape monumental history. You pause at a narrow path flanked by hedgerows, imagining the hushed whispers of reconnaissance officers creeping along, peering through branches, assessing enemy positions. Beyond the hedges, the distant horizon shimmers with the morning mist, gunpowder already mixing faintly with the damp air. Fringe tales suggest locals predicted the battle through strange omens, cows refusing to cross certain fields, or odd cloud formations that seem to mirror troop positions, but even skeptics admit the superstition added a layer of psychological tension. You tiptoe past imagined clumps of mud, sensing how the battlefield's natural features, ditches, streams, and ridges, will create choke points, hiding soldiers, cannons, and the occasional wandering officer. It's a delicate choreography of geography and strategy, and you feel like a ghost observer tracing every step that will soon become history. As you move across this mental map, you notice little details: a half-submerged wagon wheel, the glint of metal from a musket left forgotten, the gentle ripple of a stream reflecting an overcast sky. You imagine soldiers grumbling about slippery boots, officers yelling orders over the din, and the first horses nervously pawing the ground. Each element, the mud, the water, the hedgerows, intertwines with human ambition, fear, and calculation, reminding you that the land itself is an unspoken participant in the battle. By the time you reach the crest of the hill, you feel the battlefield's full scale pressing in on your senses, chaotic, tense, and alive with the promise of history unfolding before your very eyes. You step into the rising smoke, the acrid tang of gunpowder curling around your senses like a mischievous ghost, and suddenly the battlefield feels alive, almost breathing with anticipation. Cannon smoke curls lazily at first, then thickens as if the air itself is conspiring to hide the horrors and heroics that are about to unfold. You can feel the vibrations through your boots, the low rumble of the earth as heavy artillery is dragged into position, and the faint metallic clink of cannonballs rolling into place. Historians still argue whether Napoleon relied too heavily on his artillery at Waterloo or if it was precisely the lifeline that almost turned the tide, but standing here in your imagination, it's impossible not to marvel at the sheer power and orchestration involved. Every cannon, every musket, every drumbeat contributes to a rhythm of war that is as mesmerizing as it is terrifying. The roar of a distant cannon startles you, and you flinch, imagining the deafening blast echoing across the rolling hills. You notice how the smoke snakes through hedgerows and folds of terrain, briefly hiding battalions from each other, creating pockets of confusion. There's a quirky detail floating in your mind. Some gunners apparently painted their cannonballs with soot or oil to make them less visible in the daylight, a tiny act of cunning amid the chaos. You can practically feel the heat radiating from the gun barrels, the tension among the artillery crews, and the meticulous calculations of angles, distances, and timing. Every misfire or delayed shot could shift the outcome, and somehow you are both observer and participant in this delicate, explosive ballet. Moving along the mental expanse, you notice the interplay between sound and vision, the crack of a musket, the whistle of a cannonball, the shouts of officers, all layered over the thick haze of smoke. You imagine horses skidding on mud, dragging carts, and soldiers bracing themselves against the concussive blasts. There's an almost surreal quality to it, like a painting in motion where every brushstroke could mean life or death. Fringe stories hint that some gunners claim to hear whispers in the smoke, warnings from the dead or omens of disaster, but whether that's imagination or superstition, it adds an eerie flavor to the scene. Your mind senses the scale, miles of coordinated firepower, soldiers moving in choreographed chaos, and leaders calculating the impossible, all under a smoky sky that seems almost alive. You wander past a particularly thick bank of smoke, and it clears just enough for you to glimpse a cannon crew working feverishly, sweating through their uniforms, powder smudged on their faces, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. Each movement is precise, each command measured, yet the outcome is uncertain, subject to chance, terrain, and the human element. You can almost smell the acrid residue of discharged powder, hear the creak of wheels over mud, and feel the vibration of the first volleys impacting somewhere just beyond your imagined horizon. In this moment, you recognize the battlefield itself as a living entity. It observes, it responds, and it waits patiently for the story to unfold around it. You trudge through the lingering mist, your boots sinking slightly in the damp earth as the first skirmishes erupt around you. The infantry moves with disciplined chaos, musket balls whistling past your ears, or at least you imagine them doing so, and the rhythm of bayonets clashing becomes almost hypnotic. You sense the meticulous formations of line and column, soldiers shoving forward while officers shout orders above the din, their voices carrying through the fog. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of the British squares at Waterloo was due to rigorous training or sheer luck, but right now, in this imagined space, the square formations feel like living walls, resolute and unyielding. You can almost feel the pulse of fear and courage vibrating through the ranks, a strange camaraderie built on shared risk and muddy boots. You notice tiny, quirky details amid the grinding conflict. One officer apparently carried a pet dog with him, tucked under his coat to keep it safe from musket fire, a curious reminder that humanity persists even in war. The morning mist clings to every surface, dampening colors, muffling sounds, and making the world feel like a dream where danger lingers at the edges. You trudge past these imagined soldiers, hearing the rhythmic stomp of marching feet and the sudden thuds as men fall, only to rise again or be replaced by others advancing relentlessly. Every breath smells faintly of smoke and damp wool, mingling with the faint, earthy odor of churned mud. You probably wouldn't survive a day here, but your imagination lets you witness it safely, absorbing the tension without the personal cost. The ebb and flow of combat is both precise and chaotic. You watch columns collide, flags fluttering wildly, and cannon smoke weaving through the advancing lines. Fringe tales suggest that some soldiers claimed they could anticipate enemy movements based on subtle changes in wind or the cries of distant birds, but whether true or myth, it adds a layer of surreal awareness to the scene. You can almost see the young recruits trembling, gripping their muskets tightly, learning in an instant that courage and terror are intertwined, and every movement could change the outcome. Officers dash between lines, shouting commands that are partially lost in the fog, yet somehow the formations hold together, a testament to discipline under impossible circumstances. As you trudge deeper into the melee, you sense the rhythm of war like a slow, insistent drumbeat in your chest. Muskets fire in bursts, officers gesture frantically, and soldiers push forward through mud and mist. The battlefield feels alive, chaotic yet strangely structured, each skirmish a dance of calculation and impulse. You imagine dodging a misfired musket shot or stepping carefully around a fallen comrade, noting how small actions ripple outward to influence larger outcomes. This moment, this immersion, lets you feel both the terror and the strategy, the human instinct to survive while participating in something far larger than any one individual. The morning mist is your companion, softening the edges of horror, making the chaos almost dreamlike, and allowing you to trudge on, deeper into the heart of Waterloo. You feel the ground tremble beneath the thunder of hooves as cavalry charges sweep past, dust and mud spraying in every direction. The sheer speed of the mounted troops makes your heart race as if you're running alongside them, imagining sabers glinting in the muted light, horses straining against the weight of riders and gear. Historians still argue whether the French cuirassiers or the British heavy cavalry had the greater impact on the battlefield, but in your mind, both are spectacular, terrifying forces, cutting through infantry lines with precise chaos. You notice the tension in every horse's muscles, the way soldiers lean in gripping reins, shouting commands, and relying on instinct honed through countless drills. It's exhilarating and dangerous, and you secretly think you might not survive a single charge without becoming a cannonball obstacle yourself. Amid the adrenaline, quirky details emerge. Some cavalrymen apparently carried small personal charms tucked beneath their armor, tiny talismans meant to ward off injury or death. It's strangely comforting to imagine the humanity behind these armored giants, each one a mix of bravery, superstition, and sheer nerve. You step carefully through the imagined battlefield, feeling the tremor of hooves through the mud, hearing the cries of men and horses mingling into a strange symphony of war. You can almost smell the sweat, leather, and damp wool blending into the air, thick with tension and anticipation. The cavalry's impact isn't just physical, it's psychological. You sense the fear it spreads, the panic rippling through infantry lines, and the way morale can shift in an instant as a well-timed charge slices through a vulnerable flank. You follow a particular charge in your mind, imagining how a squadron of French lancers rushes a British infantry square, only to be met with disciplined volleys of musket fire. Fringe anecdotes suggest that some horses refuse to charge certain positions, seemingly sensing danger that humans could not, a detail that makes you grin in disbelief and fascination. The clash is both choreographed and chaotic, officers adjusting commands on the fly, soldiers responding instinctively, and the line between order and mayhem blurring with every passing second. You can almost hear the crunch of hooves on mud, the clash of steel, and the terrified cries of men caught in the whirlwind. As the charge subsides, dust settling, smoke lingering, you notice the subtle aftermath: trampled grass, scattered weapons, and the silent testimony of courage and fear intertwined. Cavalry isn't just about spectacle, it shapes the ebb and flow of the entire battlefield, turning tides in moments and forcing commanders to rethink strategies on the fly. You imagine tracing the paths of multiple charges, seeing how momentum builds, crashes, and shifts in unpredictable ways. Every surge of mounted force is a reminder that strategy alone cannot guarantee victory. Sometimes sheer energy and timing determine survival. And you, walking in this dreamlike battlefield, feel both exhilarated and eerily aware of how thin the line is between triumph and chaos. You trudge closer to the heart of Napoleon's strategy, feeling the weight of decisions that could shift the course of history pressing down on your shoulders. Imagine him there, map unfurled, a hand raised as he debates where to commit his forces next, the sunlight glinting off his epaulets. His gamble at Waterloo was audacious, an all-or-nothing effort to crush Wellington before Prussian reinforcements could arrive. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's timing was a critical misstep or simply an inevitable consequence of unpredictable weather and terrain, but you can picture him pacing, brow furrowed, trying to reconcile his audacity with reality. You might chuckle quietly imagining a great emperor agonizing over muddy fields and stubborn hedgerows, a man accustomed to grand victories now facing stubborn opposition. The battlefield unfolds before you in intricate detail. Troops shifting, artillery firing, cavalry poised to strike. Fringe anecdotes suggest that some aides carried pocket sundials to calculate the precise moment to attack, a reminder of the obsessive precision Napoleon demanded. You sense the tension not just in his body but in the air around him, as if the wind itself pauses to witness his decisions. Each move is calculated with care, yet uncertainty lurks everywhere. You imagine officers hesitating, soldiers whispering about impossible odds, and even Napoleon himself glancing toward the distant horizon, perhaps wondering if history will remember him for brilliance or folly. You watch as errors compound. Miscommunications between units delay attacks, mud slows artillery, and Prussian forces edge closer, forcing Napoleon to adjust his plans on the fly. You can almost smell the sweat of exhausted men, the faint tang of gunpowder in the air, and hear the shouted orders bouncing across the ridges. Quirky tidbits sneak in. Some sources suggest Napoleon's horse, Marengo, had a tendency to shy unexpectedly, adding a dash of unpredictability to a meticulously crafted strategy. You chuckle softly, imagining the great emperor nudged along by a skittish mount while Europe holds its breath. Amid this chaos, you sense the psychological toll. Confidence wavers, morale teeters, and every decision carries enormous weight. Historians debate whether Napoleon's errors were purely tactical or a combination of fatigue, overconfidence, and the sheer pressure of controlling so many moving parts. As you trudge through this scene, the battlefield feels almost alive, responding to his choices, punishing mistakes, and rewarding the rare moments of genius. You can picture the invisible threads connecting commanders, soldiers, and terrain, each tugged by a decision that might secure victory or doom an empire. In this imagined moment, you walk alongside history, feeling the tension, the audacity, and the vulnerability of a man whose ambition stretches across the continent yet is constantly at the mercy of chance, weather, and stubborn soldiers. You trudge through the smoke-thickened battlefield as the tide of battle turns, sensing a subtle shift in momentum that feels almost tangible beneath your feet. The Allied forces, rallied and resolute, begin to push back against the French advance, their lines holding firm despite exhaustion and the relentless mud. You notice the subtle coordination of musket volleys, the precise timing of artillery barrages, and the disciplined counterattacks that ripple through the ranks. Historians still argue whether Wellington's defensive positioning or the timely arrival of Blücher's Prussian forces was the decisive factor, but in your mind, the ebb and flow of battle feels like a living, breathing organism, responding dynamically to every command and misstep. You trudge past imagined soldiers, feeling the tension in their shoulders, the determination in their eyes, and the faint tremor of fear that underlies every advance. Quirky details emerge amid the chaos. Some soldiers reportedly sang to steady their nerves, or carried charms stitched into their uniforms to ward off bullets, small human gestures against overwhelming odds. You imagine the rhythmic pounding of feet, the clatter of wheels, the occasional shriek of a horn, all blending into a chaotic symphony that somehow carries a strange sense of order. Every movement is a calculated risk, every decision a gamble with lives and empire hanging in the balance. You probably wouldn't survive a real skirmish here, but in your mind, you trace the arcs of cannon fire, the advance of infantry, and the rapid repositioning of cavalry, absorbing the theater of war without any personal harm. You follow a particularly pivotal moment. An Allied counterattack surges forward, exploiting a weakness in the French lines. Fringe tales suggest that local peasants occasionally guided troops through hidden paths, providing crucial intelligence in the fog of battle, although historians debate the reliability of such accounts. You can feel the psychological pressure pressing on both sides. Panic threatens to ripple through the French ranks, while hope and adrenaline strengthen the resolve of the Allies. Officers dash between lines, shouting orders that are partially lost in the roar of conflict. Yet somehow the formations hold, flex, and advance, a testament to discipline under extreme stress. As you trudge alongside the ebbing and flowing lines, you notice tiny human moments amid the chaos. A soldier sharing water, an officer adjusting a wounded comrade's coat, a drummer boy maintaining a steady beat. These glimpses of humanity pierce the fog of strategy and bloodshed, reminding you that history is written not only by victories and defeats but by small, fleeting acts of courage and compassion. You feel the battlefield's energy shifting, the momentum tilting, and the invisible threads of fate tugging unpredictably at the lives entwined in this monumental struggle. For tonight, you follow the tide, tracing its surges and retreats, sensing the thrill and tension of pivotal moments that will decide the fate of empires. You trudge into the uneasy calm of nightfall, the battlefield stretching before you like a scarred canvas bathed in a pale, trembling light. The clash of day has faded into murmurs, distant cries, and the faint clinking of abandoned weapons. You probably wouldn't survive a night here without tripping over a stray musket or cannon wheel, yet the eerie quiet draws you in, making every shadow feel alive. Historians still debate the exact timing of retreats and regroupings, but you can sense the ebb of action as soldiers tend to the wounded, officers confer in whispered urgency, and the once-charged landscape becomes a labyrinth of mud, debris, and memories of chaos. A quirky and slightly chilling detail lingers. Locals whispered that spectral figures roamed the battlefield after dark, silhouettes of soldiers doomed to repeat the day's events endlessly. Whether true or myth, it adds a subtle shiver to your imagination as you step carefully, feeling the uneven ground underfoot and hearing the faint rustle of leaves in the night breeze. You notice the makeshift camps where medics work by lantern light, the stretchers carrying bodies, and the low murmurs of exhaustion and grief. Each flicker of flame, each shadow cast by a tent, seems to echo the day's horror while simultaneously holding the fragile pulse of life in its gentle glow. You follow the paths where retreating troops slip through mud and darkness, the occasional clatter of armor or pack reminding you that even in the lull, the battlefield never fully sleeps. Fringe stories suggest that some soldiers claim to hear whispers in the mist, perhaps warnings, perhaps memories, blurring the line between reality and imagination. You sense the psychological toll as fatigue, fear, and adrenaline collide. Commanders must plan for another day, while ordinary soldiers navigate the thin line between rest and vigilance. The night is alive with tension, yet softened by a strange, dreamlike quality, where each tree, ditch, and hedgerow carries the ghost of movement, the imprint of decisions, and the lingering echo of the day's violence. As you trudge along, the landscape begins to feel less hostile, more contemplative. You imagine the eerie quiet punctuated by distant sounds, a horse shifting, a dropped musket, the whisper of wind over churned mud. Each moment is suspended in fragile time, a reminder of both human resilience and the cruel randomness of survival. You notice subtle patterns, tracks, broken wheels, discarded personal items, that hint at stories untold, lives interrupted, and courage displayed. Walking through this nocturnal world, you feel both the weight of history and the soft pulse of life persisting amid ruins, preparing you for the reflection and reckoning that come with counting the cost of empire tomorrow. You trudge across the scarred fields, counting the cost of empire in silence, your boots heavy with mud and the weight of countless lives lost. The devastation is staggering: abandoned weapons, trampled tents, and the eerie stillness that follows relentless chaos. You probably wouldn't survive long here without your imagination doing all the heavy lifting, yet in this mental space, you can process the enormity of what has transpired. Historians still debate the casualty figures, estimates fluctuate, with tens of thousands of men killed, wounded, or missing, but numbers alone cannot convey the human toll, the mix of bravery, fear, and folly etched into the sodden earth beneath your feet. Among the factual devastation, quirky anecdotes surface. Some soldiers reportedly salvaged personal items from the dead, from pocket watches to letters, small tokens meant to maintain a thread of humanity amid horror. You notice the subtle traces of political fallout too, the whispers among the ranks, the anxiety of commanders, and the trembling anticipation of what news will reach Paris and London. The battlefield feels like a living archive, preserving both strategic decisions and intimate human stories, layered like sediment across time. You trudge through muddy ditches and across flattened hedgerows, observing how geography continues to dictate where bodies fell, where artillery was most effective, and how the land itself seems to mourn the suffering imposed upon it. The psychological imprint is palpable. Soldiers, officers, and civilians alike carry stories of survival, near misses, and small acts of courage that historians attempt to contextualize but can never fully capture. Fringe tales suggest that locals avoided certain fields, claiming the ground was cursed, that misfortune clung to the footprints of the fallen, a notion debated vigorously by scholars, yet evocative enough to persist in legend. You imagine these whispers carried on the wind, mingling with smoke and mud, reminding anyone walking here, even centuries later, that every empire leaves both glory and devastation in its wake. The battlefield is a stark testament to human ambition, resilience, and the unpredictable whims of fate. You pause near a shallow depression, observing scattered musket balls and a broken cart, subtle reminders of the logistical nightmare that war brings. It strikes you how small elements, weather, terrain, miscommunication, conspire with human decisions to determine outcomes. As you walk through this mental landscape, you realize that counting the cost is not just about statistics. It's about understanding the fragile intersection of strategy, chance, and humanity. And in this quiet, reflective moment, the magnitude of empire's reach settles over you like a soft, sobering fog, preparing your mind to carry these stories forward, whispering lessons through time even as the physical world slowly heals. You trudge through the silent fields, sensing whispers of history lingering in every shadow and stone. The battlefield, once a chaotic symphony of cannon fire, musket volleys, and cavalry charges, now lies quiet, its scars softened by grass and time. Tourists and historians wander here today, walking the same muddy paths where soldiers once struggled to hold formations or cling to life, yet you can almost feel the echoes of commands, footsteps, and despair vibrating faintly beneath the surface. Historians still debate how the memory of Waterloo shaped European consciousness, whether it was the definitive end of Napoleon's ambitions or merely a chapter in a continuing struggle for power, but standing here, even in imagination, you sense both the weight of history and the lingering human drama. Quirky details emerge in the calm. Local guides sometimes point out the cursed spots where unusual events supposedly occurred, from cannonballs that allegedly bounced strangely to sudden mists that confused entire battalions. Whether fact or folklore, these stories color the battlefield with an almost mystical layer, making it feel alive, as if it remembers every shouted order, every footfall, and every whispered prayer. You notice small markers commemorating fallen soldiers, remnants of tents, or fragments of artillery now slowly rusting into the earth, subtle physical reminders of chaos that once dominated these fields. It's humbling, almost dreamlike, to feel the connection between past and present, realizing that memory persists not only in books but in the very soil beneath your feet. Walking further, you reflect on human ambition, resilience, and folly, the patterns repeating through centuries of conflict. Fringe anecdotes suggest some visitors report sudden chills or whispers, inexplicable sensations that make the stories of ghosts and curses seem tantalizingly real. You trudge carefully, feeling how imagination allows you to witness history's heartbeat while remaining safe, letting sensory impressions, the smell of damp earth, the distant hum of modern life, the soft rustle of leaves, blend with memories of gunpowder, mud, and shouted commands. The battlefield, in its present calm, becomes both teacher and storyteller, guiding you through the lessons of strategy, courage, and human limitation. As you wander, the horizon softens, shadows lengthen, and the atmosphere becomes almost meditative. The echoes of men and horses fade gently, leaving behind an impression of resilience and tragedy intertwined. You carry with you the lingering presence of history, a quiet awareness that monumental events are made up of countless small human acts, both heroic and flawed. Tracing the paths, touching the markers, and listening to the soft whispers of the wind, you feel connected across time, realizing that the story of Waterloo continues to speak, if only we pause to listen. And as the imagined battlefield drifts into night, you sense the enduring resonance of human endeavor, ambition, and memory, leaving you ready for a gentle, reflective wind down. You slow your pace, letting the battlefield stretch out around you like a fading dream, the echoes of musket fire and cannon smoke softening into distant memory. The mud, the hedgerows, the rolling hills, all of it seems to exhale a quiet, almost gentle sigh, as if the earth itself is settling after centuries of turmoil. Your boots feel lighter now, no longer weighed down by the imagined chaos, and the soft whisper of the wind through the grass becomes a lullaby, carrying away tension, fear, and adrenaline alike. You probably wouldn't survive a real night here, but in this mental space, the world is calm, forgiving, and expansive, and you feel a comforting sense of connection to those who once walked these paths, lived, fought, and endured. The stories linger, but their edges are softened. You imagine soldiers resting, heads bowed, tents slumbering under a velvet sky, and the first stars winking above as if to assure you that time moves onward, carrying memory and lesson alike. Fringe tales of ghosts or curses drift by like faint smoke, intriguing yet distant, adding a sense of mystery without ever piercing the peace that now blankets the land. Each breath you take is slow, each heartbeat a quiet echo in the open fields, reminding you that human ambition, folly, and courage have long since been absorbed into the soil, leaving behind only subtle impressions and whispers for those willing to listen. Your gaze drifts toward the horizon, softening, blurring, until the present mingles seamlessly with the past. You feel the weight of history lift gently, leaving only reflection, awe, and a warm sense of reverence. The stories of courage, strategy, misstep, and endurance settle around you like a soft blanket, coaxing your mind toward stillness and ease. You imagine lying down on the grassy slope, eyes tracing the first glimmers of moonlight, allowing every detail, the mud, the smoke, the whispers, the distant hoofbeats, to fade into a calm hum of memory and imagination. Time stretches gently, and you sense the battlefield breathing in quiet rhythm with your own steady breath. And as your mind drifts towards sleep, the echoes of Waterloo transform from chaos into a gentle lullaby, a tapestry of human endeavor and endurance, softening into night. You carry the lessons, the stories, and the strange beauty of the battlefield into your dreams, letting the earth cradle both history and imagination until your thoughts settle completely.